This is Pastor Janie Beasley of Lighthouse Pentecostal Tabernacle in Central Lake, Michigan. I want to speak today on the prayer of faith, and I'm reading from Mark chapter 9, verses 17 through 18. And one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. And wheresoever he taketh him, he teareth him, and he foameth, and gnasheth with his teeth, and pineth away. And I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. This is part one, and next week I will do part two on the prayer of faith. But in this particular work today, I want us to look at the frustration of unanswered prayers. The Father blames himself. And then number three, that you can use the faith that you already have. So let's look at the frustration of unanswered prayers. And this man brings his son to the Lord. And we can see some frustration, and I'm sure in the years of caring for his son. It said, wheresoever he taketh him, he teareth him, and he foameth and gnasheth with his teeth. And then verse 22, it says, oftentimes it casts him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. And what the Father is describing in these verses, the condition of his son, is demon possession, and or someone that is controlled by demons. And the demons would gain such control over this son that it would throw him in the fire and in the water to try to kill him. And the Father had spent many years trying to care for him, but also to protect him and to protect him from harm and to keep the spirit from killing this boy. And nothing had changed, and I'm sure it was getting worse. But then he brings his son to the disciples and asks the disciples to cast the spirit out of his son, and it didn't happen. It says, I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. In verse 22, he looks at Jesus and he said, if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And so you can hear the frustration in the Father's words and in his cry to the Lord. The son was getting no better, and he was probably getting worse. As his son was getting older, he was becoming physically stronger and more difficult to care for and more difficult to control. And the Father was probably exhausted from caring for him, and it sounds like he was at the end, and he could no longer care for his son. There had to be an answer to his prayer, and I know that many times you have, and I have found myself at a place of frustration when we prayed for things, and we prayed and we prayed, and God had not answered those prayers. And we get frustrated because we're not seeing a resolution to our situation. And so we do what this father did. And so number two, the father blames himself. And Jesus said in verse 23, Jesus saith unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. And immediately that sent the father into issues. In verse 24 it says, and straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. He was a desperate father. And so here I think we can see in these verses that he was saying, I believe that you can do anything. I believe you can heal my son. I believe you can cast this devil out. You can do anything. I totally believe that you're able to do anything, but I'm not sure you'll do it for me. I really believe that's what we're hearing in this story about the father with his son. And he was saying, I have a little bit of faith, but I'm not sure I have enough faith to receive what I need from you. I'm just an imperfect person with an imperfect faith, a small amount of faith. And in his desperation, he said, Jesus, if you can do anything, help us. In spite of my situation, can you help me, Lord? And what is so confusing about this story is that he admitted and he felt like he was wrong and something was wrong with him, something was wrong with his faith, and yet Jesus answered his prayer. And he said he cast the demon out of the young boy and set him free. And so so evidently his faith was not an issue, but I think that what we learn from this story of imperfect faith and getting an answer to prayer is that number 3, prayers can be answered without, and let me do my air quotation marks, prayers can be answered without perfect faith. And the father was trying his best to believe, but he felt like he was falling short. And that sounds like the way with us sometimes. We pray and it's like, okay, something's wrong with my faith. I don't have enough faith. And but just like this man, he felt all mixed up in his emotions. His emotions were up and down. It was like he was on a roller coaster ride emotionally. He was having all kinds of thoughts. He was just in a bad way emotionally. And it just at a point of desperation and just a complex set of emotions. And yet, God answered his prayer. So he admitted he was kind of messed up in the way he was feeling and thinking. And let me give you another example of a group of people that were kind of messed up as well. And in the book of Acts, the Bible talks about in Acts chapter 12 that Peter was put in prison for preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if God did not intervene in that situation, Peter would be taken out and he would be killed. And Acts chapter 12 verse 5 says, Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. So we have a group of people that are praying day and night for God to set him free and for God to spare his life. They prayed without ceasing. And as a result of their prayer, God sent an angel and opened the prison doors and set him free. And then Peter shows up at the house, at the place where they were praying, and knocks on the door. In Acts chapter 12, verses 13 through 16, it says, And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a damsel came to hearken named Rhoda. And when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate. Now listen how messed up they were. They were praying with all of their hearts, and this is the response they gave. And they said unto her, Thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed that it was even so. And then they said, It is his angel. I love this story. But Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the door, they saw him, and they were astonished. What a mixed up group of people. They prayed without ceasing. God sent an angel and set him free, and he shows up at the place they're praying. And they were just, they couldn't believe that God had even answered their prayers. And when Rhoda ran back inside and told them, Peter's at the door. And this is my translation, but they looked at her and they said, You're crazy. You are crazy. You are just imagining things. You're just imagining things. And she kept insisting that Peter was at the gate. No, he's at the gate. And when they saw how serious she was, then their hearts fell up, apparently. And they said, well, it can't be Peter. So apparently they killed him. And that's his spirit that came by to visit. They are messed up. And but she finally convinced them that it was Peter. And so they go to the door, they go to the gate, and they opened the gate, and they saw Peter standing there in the flesh. He had not been killed, he was standing there, and they were astonished. What a messed up group of people. But they prayed, and God answered their prayers. That should be encouraging to us today. So back to the story of the father. So we see God's people scattered out through the Word of God was kind of messed up in different ways, but God still answered their prayers. And so the father brought his son to Jesus, and admitting that maybe his faith wasn't perfect, but he received the answer to his prayer. And so I believe one of the greatest lessons we can learn from this story is that you don't need you don't need perfect faith for God to answer your prayers. And I believe that should be an encouragement to you today. Regardless of how you feel, regardless of what's going on around you, regardless of your circumstances, keep praying. Don't be discouraged. Regardless of how you feel, keep praying. And Jesus gave us a parable in Luke chapter 18 about a woman that kept going to a judge And the Bible said this was an unjust judge, and he became frustrated at her coming and knocking on his door every day, so he finally gave in and gave her what she wanted. And Jesus is not an unjust judge. He is a just God. But he spake the parable in Luke chapter 18, verse 1, and he spake a parable unto them to this end, that men ought always to pray and not to faint. He said, in spite of what's going on around you, even though it looks like your prayers are not being answered, he said, don't stop praying. Keep praying. And verse 7 says, and shall not God avenge his own elect which cry unto him day and night? So he said, don't quit praying. Your prayers will be answered. Just keep on praying. And then in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9, it says, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. What did Jesus say? Praying not to faint. And in Galatians chapter 6, this was talking about all kinds of things in living for the Lord, but it also applies to faith. You will reap if you faint not. So keep on praying. And I know the social distancing limitations and restrictions have brought a lot of frustration to people and has just limited you in so many ways. And a lot of people are frustrated in so many ways. But let me just urge you to find you a place alone with the Lord, a quiet place, a quiet time with the Lord, and just pray your frustrations through. Just keep praying. God's going to answer, and do that on all of the needs in your life, and you will see God answer your prayer. And next week, I want us to look at the prayer of faith, and I want to do an illustration on how to release your needs to the Lord. And I know a lot of people, years past, they talked about releasing your faith. And that's really not what you need to do. You need to release your problem to the Lord. So we're going to look at how to release your problem and how to put it in the hands of the Lord and leave it with Him next week. But until next week, keep praying. Don't stop. Don't stop praying, because the answer's on the way. And the Lord will answer your prayer, and He will meet your need. So He said, you will reap if you faint not. So keep praying. God's going to come through for you. Amen.